The latest from the international summit aimed at ending Libya's civil war. Libyan Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj of the UN-backed Government of National Unity attended the conference, as did General Khalifa Haftar, the head of the Libyan National Army and leader of a rival administration. During the meeting in Paris, the two parties agreed to hold parliamentary and presidential elections on the 10th of December this year. Well, according to a draft document, there are also calls for the creation of a unified central bank. Dozens of countries and organisations were represented at the talks, including 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council.
So from now until September 16th, there's a joint commitment to take the necessary measures that will enable the parties to organize an electoral process in a satisfactory manner, either with a new constitution or on the basis of an electoral law which would have been duly voted. And the 3 presidents and Commander Haftar have committed themselves to that, which is essential because they are the key people who will make this process possible. The second element is the organization of the presidential and parliamentary elections on December 10th, 2018. So the commitment on the basis of this process is to fully and safely give back to the Libyan people their sovereignty and allow them to express it on this date.
Well, agreeing on an election date is a massive breakthrough for Libya. A violent civil war has raged in the North African nation since 2011. CGTN's Leslie Marungu takes a look back at the events that led to this point.
October the 20th, 2011, the day that changed Libya. Muammar Gaddafi is captured and killed in the city of Sirte. Just 3 days later, the National Transitional Council officially declares that Libya had been liberated. In the weeks to follow, NATO ends its operations in the North African country, and the struggle to form a new government begins. By August of 2012, a transitional General National Congress is in power. Parliamentary elections are held in June of 2014. The results see the transitional leadership replaced by an administration dominated by anti-Islamists. After weeks of deadly clashes, Islamist militias stormed Tripoli and set up a rival government. The country now finds itself with 2 governments and 2 centers of power. The absence of a unified leadership paves the way for various militia and extremist organizations to flourish. Several terrorist attacks take place. In December of 2015, after months of negotiations led by the UN, a government of national accord is declared. Based in Tripoli, it's headed by Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj. But the Libyan National Army, under the leadership of General Khalifa Haftar and aligned with the parliament elected in 2014, refuses to acknowledge the unity government. In July of 2017, al-Sarraj and Haftar meet in Paris and agree on a ceasefire. On the ground, however, nothing changes. Violence continues from suicide blasts to attacks on Tripoli's airport, and several rounds of negotiations fail to resolve the standoff. Leslie Marungu, CGTN.
Well, for more on this, we have Eleanor Casas joining us in Paris, Yasser Hakim in Cairo, and Liling Tan in New York for us. Let's start with you first, Eleanor, in Paris. An election date for Libya appears to have now been set. Has this decision received the backing of everyone in the Paris conference, and how was it arrived at?
Well, it's an extraordinary achievement to begin with to have even got the 4 rival Libyan leaders that we saw at today's meeting in Paris in the same room, never mind getting them to agree on the same text. So certainly 4 of Libya's key leaders, including the Prime Minister of that interim government that you announced just then, the UN-backed government, and the General Khalifa Haftar, who of course is in charge of the militia that controls now a large part of Libya and has been deadly opposed to the UN-backed government, have apparently signed up to this deal. There are a few caveats though. Nevertheless, there are militias that are important in Libya that are opposed to this deal, that were not here today, and that say they want to block the deal precisely because they've been excluded from this this process. Also, the press conference that we saw here in Paris today was supposed to end with a signing ceremony when all the leaders present were supposed to sign off on this election agreement. In the end, nobody signed it, and they said that they would do so once they got back to Libya. But it's a clear warning sign that they may still not quite all be on the same page.
OK, thank you, Eleanor. We will return to you in a moment. Let's now go to Yasser, who is in Cairo for us. Many critics appeared convinced that Libya was not in a position to hold credible polls soon. Is this position likely to change, do you think, after these Paris talks?
Well, obviously the agreement that we saw and is quite promising. However, always the devil is in the details. How will they be able to apply this on the ground, the 8 points that were mentioned? How can they secure an election process? How can all the political forces on the ground be able to work together, being fair in the way they will secure and organize the elections? You have to know that Libya is divided into many cities that are controlled by different groups, and they're all armed groups. And they are, some of them are affiliated to the powers that were at Paris, and others are not. So even if they all decide that they will contribute in the elections, then a city that is controlled by one militia will probably try to make sure that the voters are voting for the side that this militia approves of, and not the other side. So whoever they know will not vote for it will not be allowed to go to vote. So how can all these sides guarantee that everyone can go and vote fairly and safely without being intimidated by one side or another? So the details are important coming up in the next few months to ensure that this agreement is applied in a positive manner that will help the Libyan people.
OK, Yasser, thank you. We'll return to you in a moment. Now let's go over to Liling Tan, who is in New York for us. Liling, has there been any reaction from the UN on the outcome of the Libya Peace Conference in Paris? And how is the planned December election date likely to be received?
Well, no, we haven't had official word from the UN just yet, although the UN spokesperson did say about an hour ago that they expect to issue one very soon. But as of now, we have not heard from the Secretary General or the UN support mission in Libya known as UNSMIL. But when word comes, it is expected that the UN will welcome these latest developments, albeit with cautious optimism. Remember that the UN has in many ways been involved, has had a long vested interest in peace in Libya for many years now. But attempts, as we've just heard, attempts at peace deals have been unsuccessful, and despite 6 envoys in about 7 years, there have been very little traction gained. Now, the current envoy, Ghassan Salameh, did try to re-inject some momentum into the political process when in September he proposed a new action plan or roadmap, political roadmap to the Security Council, and it seems that his efforts at least have bore some fruit. Now, so any prospect of an election being held before the end of the year would likely be a welcomed move by the United Nations and its different agencies, because any move to end the splintered government and reunify the country would be a step in the right direction. OK,
thank you, Liling. We'll return to you in a moment. Let's now return to Eleanor Casas, who is in Paris. Given that Libya is still in turmoil, what safeguards were discussed or identified to ensure that the polls do go ahead as scheduled and smoothly?
Well, we didn't hear all that much detail about that in today's conference. One key problem is that there's currently no electoral law under which a vote could take place in Libya. And the French President Emmanuel Macron announced that all the parties to today's conference have agreed that by September the 16th, they will either all sign off on an electoral law or possibly they will write a new constitution. There was one written back in 2015 which was supposed to be put to a referendum to the Libyan electorate, and that referendum never took place. So they do all need to agree on a new electoral law, and they've promised to do so by mid-September. In terms of other legal concerns, like how exactly to carry out a fair and transparent poll in a country at war where it will be very difficult to ensure the security of voters or of international monitors, we haven't yet had any detail.
Okay, thank you for that, Eleanor. Now back to you, Yasser, in Cairo. Libya's electoral office, it was struck by a terror attack earlier this month. What should be done to improve public safety and general security ahead of the December polls?
Well, you know, Libya has two armies, two parliaments, two governments, and a divided central bank. I think that the most crucial part is that those two governments and two armies are united into one, and that these powers or sides or rivals in Paris would seriously show intention and action to unite themselves, have one government that is accepted by all Libyans and by all factions, and have one army. And thus, this army will then be able to be armed, because right now, because there are two armies, there's an international embargo, arms embargo on Libya, not allowing the army to have weapons, and therefore it's weakened against the armed militias in the country and the extremists and terrorist groups. So they have to really sit down and unite the army. Therefore, this army will be strong enough to fight the terrorist groups, to stand against the armed militias that do not approve of elections or democratic process. And then they will be able, or this army will be able to be fair in securing the whole country so that the elections would be done in a proper manner. And obviously, you need to also make sure that these extremist groups and militias do not receive the proper funding and all the support they have from foreign powers and regional powers that support one side against the other. This influence has to stop so that it's a situation where all the Libyans can solve their problems together and sit together and try to push forward a united Libya, a united system. Once this happens, then elections can take place, and then we can say that it could be successful. But first, you have to secure the country, you have to have an army, you have to have a unified government as well.
Okay, thank you for that, Yasser. Now back to you, Liling, in New York. What kind of support should the international community now extend to Libya to help it organise for the planned elections and ultimately give the country political stability?
Well, we know that the UN's role, as well as the international community support, has been quite crucial throughout this entire process. And as you mentioned earlier as well, the permanent 5 members of the Security Council were present at this meeting in France, as were other countries, including Italy, Qatar, the UAE, as well as Turkey. So their role will be very significant. Now, the problem is what we have right now is only broad information based on this joint statement. We understand that the UN will be working with authorities to propose a constitution, set a timeline for adoption. We do know that the UN envoy will also be in close consultations with Libyan authorities in terms of establishing or making sure conditions are right for elections to take place, to set up a unified security forces and institutions, and also to ensure to safeguard the electoral process, to ensure that there's no obstruction or disruption. But as we have heard from Yasser, and as we can infer from Eleanor's comments, the devil will be in the details.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That was Liling Tan in New York, Yasser Hakim for us in Cairo, and in Paris, Eleanor Casas. Thank you to all of you.